Hey everyone, my name is Joshua Escobar, and I'm here to present you with a few creative writing exercises. I first gave out these exercises at the Poetry Project as part of the discourse series on Utopia and Dystopia, and I'm here to present them again as part of the Poetry Project's marathon reading. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope that these are productive for you. All right, so the first exercise, you'll want some pen and paper, of course, or colored pencils if you have them. And what I would like you to do is to visualize a poem. So pick a poem, any poem. As you read, I'd like you to draw as you read, or in response to your reading, or even as a way of listening. And you can play with line weight, pattern, and color, and just draw as you read. This is kind of an unusual exercise, but I like it because it allows us to engage the process immediately. And I developed this very simple exercise when I was working on my first manuscript, and I was feeling burnt out towards the end of it, and I just needed something to get the juices flowing. And so I produced all of these drawings, none of which were very great, but the best one you see on the screen now on the left. And I was like, what if I had like a line of poetry that was like blue, or like serious, or, blue, like, and then it was followed by like a yellow line. And then it was followed by a red line that was like messy and energetic, but the yellow lines were like, you get the point. And so it was a really cool way to think about form, and it led to the poem that you see on the right. So this exercise goes both ways. So pick a poem, any poem, and start visualizing it. And as you work, I'm going to present a little lecture on utopia and dystopia. All right, and this is a shortened talk from the one I gave at the Poetry Project a few weeks back. And it imagines utopia as a neighborhood celebration. This first part. Just to give you a quick definition, utopia is like an idealized way of living, or the project of imagining that way of living. And it's exciting because that effort can be short-lived or have full of shortcomings, but it is also like realizing a beautiful version, or participating in what's most beautiful in life. So I like thinking of utopia as like on a small scale, as a neighborhood celebration. And this line of thinking comes from Chris Marker's Sans Soleil. He talks about like politics at one point in this French film, and this French filmmaker, and he visits one of the cities that America bombed in World War II, a city that people said nothing would ever grow again. And he looks at like how it's just like rapidly creating the future and bridging the present with the future, and dwelling in both. And he has this beautiful line, I bow to the economic miracle, but what I want to show you are the neighborhood celebrations. And I encourage you to watch the film if you have time. And an example of utopia as a neighborhood celebration actually comes from Nicole Seeley's Instagram. She had this wonderful post about the joy to the polls, but she has since updated her Instagram. So I found a video of it online. But just thinking of like utopia is not necessarily this like lofty thing that is only accessible by a few, but can be manifested and realized. So this organization called Joy to the Polls um, set up DJ booths and live and music at different polling places in our most recent election that many people thought would uh, result in violence, and especially against people of color who were at the ballot boxes. And so I really like thinking about Joy to the Polls and creating kind of this utopian space and experience of voting um, in a very dystopian moment in in our country's history. All right, so utopia can be a place, and but it also can be an effort. And this effort you can trace back to this line of thinking to Henry Lefebvre, who was this French philosopher who wrote in 1867, not 1967, as the PowerPoint says, but 1867, that just by inhabiting a city, you have the right to change it. You have the right, you have a say in what happens in the city and how the city works, even. And he called that the right to the city. And very exciting thinker. Another way of thinking about utopia and utopian effort is through the wonderful artist Bushra Khalili. I'm so sorry if I mispronounce that. I'm monolingual and I'm bound to do that all the time. But she writes this, she makes really amazing art. Many of you are probably very familiar with it, but she traces the journey of immigrants who are trying to attain citizenship in the very countries that are attacking them and working against them. And she charts their lives, their journeys with these maps. And it's just I think it's a really wonderful inversion of the colonial map that's imprinted on all of our imaginations. And utopian effort, how could you not talk about Colleen Smith's current exhibition at the LACMA, which is called Give It or Leave It, which brings together different filmmakers, Black filmmakers who are working in the 20th century, who were working decades apart from each other, and she brings them, but they were all kind of thinking about utopia and documenting utopia, and she brings them all together in this exhibit, and just on the sole basis of that they should all be together in the same room in conversation, and that they are in conversation with each other, and that they're thinking about utopia. I highly encourage you to go see it, and I could talk about this all day. So we talked previously about utopia, and now I want to kind of take a turn and talk about dystopia. And my students actually put together a wonderful project one semester about utopia and dystopia, and I asked them to go document the Inland Empire, where I was born and raised, which is this region east of Los Angeles. And it has kind of the same relationship to Los Angeles as New Jersey does to New York. It's kind of, the Inland Empire is seen, it's like the twisted sister or the misshapen offspring. It's the center. LA is the center of everything, and the Inland Empire is the periphery. And so I asked them to take pictures of it, and we weren't going to label it if it was utopia or dystopia. And so they put together this really wonderful collection. And so some people would see these images and think, oh my God, that's dystopia. That's the desert, and people are living in it and horrible. And then other people, it's like, this is my home. Like, I love it here. It's gorgeous. And one image that I always come back to is this image on the left, of this being like someone's home, and it's like this, you see like an overturned bucket, and there's trash by it, and even further there's like the trash, the scale of it increases, and then you see a mobile home or a trailer, and it's like it's someone's home, like someone lives amid all of this. And then on the right, you see like these people think this is like this really great like light up exhibit, but for me, it just looks like completely dystopian. And so the conclusion that we came to is that utopia and dystopia can be mapped on top of each other. Or the thesis that we came to was that dystopia and utopia can be mapped on top of each other. And I thought that's really interesting for a number of reasons, but I think it really gets to what is exciting about utopian thinking, and then what is like dangerous about utopian thinking. If it's all thought, you know, it's not supposed to be all thought. You're supposed to put it into practice. And so that's exactly what we're going to do with this next exercise. So for your first exercise, you drew a map of utopia and of your utopia. And now for the second exercise, I would like us to think about how we can travel to that utopia. So for the first exercise, that visual drawing of the visualizing a poem is of your utopia, or of a utopia, or it could be a dystopia, whatever you want. But for the second exercise, I would like you to write a haiku and a prose passage that describes the journey to that utopia. And this haiku, and this form is called the haibun, and it was practiced a lot in the 17th century in Japan. This example comes from Basho. And Basho was known and is often touted as a haiku master. And I got this lesson and came across Basho through C.S. Giscombe. So what do you need to make a haibun? Well, you need a haiku and a prose passage. So the prose passage should describe like the journey and movement and the thoughts. And then the haiku can also just is a time in which you want that journey to either loosen in meaning or clot in meaning, to complicate or highlight, you know, loosen or clot. Those are the metaphors that were given to me by C.S. Giscombe. But yeah, so here we have on the left we have an example. It talks about Basho beginning this journey, which begins his wonderful book of haibuns, of these travel poems. And for the prose passage, it doesn't have to be anything special. You can use your own voice, your everyday voice. But for the haiku, you're really going to want to elevate it through somehow, even by loosening the meaning or clotting the meaning. And just to give you a really quick rundown of the haiku, a haiku has three things. It has 17 syllables or less. So it doesn't need to always have 575. It could have less. Less is better. It has an image, which is like in the haiku on the right, we see the grass turning into a doll's household, like the seasons changing. In that image, and then the third one is, of course, a seasonal reference, and it could be a footnote. It could be oblique or subtle or overt, like the grass changing. And so this is your second prompt of imagining going to the place that you drew on your map. All right, and so that's the second prompt, second of three. And you know, take as long as you want for this. You can turn it into a whole book of haibuns, as Basho did in his wonderful book, Backroads to Far Towns, which I encourage you all to read. In fact, when I was assigned this book in C.S. Giscombe's class, by the end of reading this book, I knew that I wanted to become a poet. This was the book by a non-living poet that made me want to become a poet. And so this, just in the interest of time, I want to present you with the last creative writing exercise, which is the scavenger hunt. So like the first exercise, it was you worked with the visual arts, you made a map, you dabbled in it a little bit. The second asked you to produce a travel log, a haibun, a mixture of prose and poetry, a mixture of you documenting a journey or articulating a journey, and um, and then having a haiku. And for this third exercise, it's going to involve you getting up a little bit, getting lost in your own house. So what I would like you to do is to find two objects that are not related to one another, and then to put them in conversation in a poem. And so after you find each object, I would like you to think about the syntax and language and associations with that object. And then I would like you to develop a new bond or relationship beyond use, possession, or consumption to that object. And so this is a little, just find cool stuff in your house. We all have it. And one of the poets when I did this workshop a couple of weeks ago, they found a hand that was like off of a marble statue that they use as like to hold their keys, and it had been with them for 10 years. And I just love that. It's like, it's so, the relationships that we have to things are just so uncanny of how we live. Even it's like the objects, some of the objects that we're surrounded by, they travel with us our whole lives, and some of them are even closer than we are to people that we know and love. And so this is, this scavenger hunt is very much in the spirit of making the near and making the near dear again, or realizing utopia as something in close proximity to us, or those possibilities, are always there. All right, so for this last exercise, just find two objects that are dissimilar and write a poem about them. And think about the language and syntax associated with each object. And try not to think about it as like a use, something you own or something you use or something you consume. One poet wrote about like an avocado and a chin strap or chin that her mom bought her. And I might write about piñatas and sunglasses. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. I hope you were able to produce some really wonderful poems, and have a wonderful 2021, y'all.